talk a little bit about what's going on the farm. And I'm going to talk a little bit this. When we look at crop budgets for over the last 8 years, they've been, and we don't see this changing anytime soon, we continue to see negative margins going forward. And that's pretty much across the board. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the country, but at the same time, we're not in a farm crisis. When we look at, for those of you, I can see lots of gray hairs, remember the 1980s, we're not in a 1980s farm crisis. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit just here in just a second. But I think we're looking more like the 1990s. And I'm going to credit Jason Henderson at Purdue University talking about this, and you might look up some of the stuff he's talked about. But think about what happened in the 1990s. Land values continued to increase slowly. We saw basically level commodity prices, very small margins. We did see more government help or saw more government intervention in agriculture, whether it was policy or whether it was money. And so we're in a situation now where we're probably going to be here for the next, probably for a while. And I think that's something we have to think about and plan accordingly. But I've talked a little bit about, here's some of the highlights of our baseline. I talked about the feed side. You know, exports fairly stagnant. We continue to see pretty high prices, and what's going to be the profit. How do we make money producing corn? The good news about corn, yields continue to go up, surprisingly under maybe rather adverse weather conditions since the drought of 12, we continue to produce a crop going forward. And that's one thing the market's reflecting. It's going, well, they told me it was wet and it won't be a crop, and they told me that last year and we still produced a crop, and now we did see a change this year, but the fact that we still produced a crop that maybe a lot of us thought we wouldn't, and that's remarkable to me. There's some highlights from the bean. Beans have a lot of things. The trade issue obviously is an issue. Will the Chinese come back? African swine fever has certainly cut the demand, but that demand's being picked up in other parts of the world, the U.S. being a big one. We're seeing more chickens and more pigs being fed that will eventually go to China or go into Southeast Asia and find their way into the Chinese market, because pork is very, very expensive now and they need the meat.
And this is probably a slide you don't really want to see. You are probably, well, you're probably not eating many French fries, but you're probably eating some Dutch and Belgian French fries. Or the Belgians like to call them Belgian fries, and they originated in Belgium, so the French nicked them off Belgium. So that's what they say. So around about 100,000 tons of exports to EU exports into the US of fries, because you've got such a strong market here, and EU being so sort of competitive, that's increased. And you can see that's increased very quickly over the last 2 or 3 years. And probably some pressure on that again this next year, and we're not really expecting to see a great increase in European fry exports just because of the availability. So a pretty strong and tight market across the world.
This is what happens with all the potatoes, or this is how all the potatoes you all grow get consumed. You can see that frozen is now 40% of the production. That's a pretty significant amount, with fresh right around 25%, chips 14%, and so forth. So this slide shows one of the most fundamental things that has changed in the U.S. market and that really has impacted what you all do and how you sell your product. And that's the fact that now consumers in the U.S. spend more money on food away from home than they do at home. Fortunately, we're taking excellent advantage of this opportunity. Potatoes are on 83% of all menus. So we see, if we look at what's been happening with domestic sales, that we've had this nice increase in food service, some slight declines at retail, but the overall for the last 5 years was this 2.3% increase. And potatoes are America's favorite vegetable. This is based on surveys that we've been doing for many, many years, and that growth there from 11% to 32% is just a fantastic slide. It just shows that you all are delivering a product that they want. You've made modifications in how you deliver it, what you deliver, how you package. That's made it more and more popular. So it is America's favorite vegetable. But first, just looking at how the product goes out of this country, I think it's always important for us to recognize the role that DHI plays in moving potatoes offshore. DHI has always played an important part of this industry. as a floor price, and those exports are very, very important.
And here are some examples of precision automation and digital platforms that we see today. Make every pass count. The tractor remains the machine that makes the most passes through the field in a given year. Each pass needs to be as productive as possible, not only for the task at hand, but also the ability to gather the data for subsequent passes and operations. Guidance is no longer an option, it's table stakes. It's base equipment, providing sub-inch accuracy where overlaps are virtually eliminated, fuel saved, seed and chemical use is reduced, and the overall tractor footprint is reduced.
Ag tech, we see it doubling ag tech investment every year. There's a lot of organizations, companies, Silicon Valley, that see that this industry is ripe for disruption, and they're investing significant dollars into empowering you to make better decisions, to have more control, and to end around some of the conventional organizations that have been built across agriculture. This third dynamic, the rise of automation in the shared economy, it builds on what you heard from our friends from John Deere. The idea that data is king. And oh, by the way, a dynamic coming out of the Nashville war game was that data will ultimately be part of the product. It'll be merged with whatever that commodity is in order to create the traceability across the agri-food value chain. This dynamic of sharing data, of autonomous, will grow, and over the next 2 decades, the belief of the group was that we would see a changing dynamic on how equipment is purchased and run, and that equipment may become smaller, operate in fleets that are coordinated with each other without people, and that you could service areas really faster, more efficiently through the night even, and that you could operate your farm really by almost an Uber-like sharing of time on those platforms. And that it may be that farmers and ranchers won't have to purchase $1 million plus equipment in order to serve their farm over time. Consumers today already fully expect to have visibility of the agri-food value chain. They don't have it, but they expect to. And food companies and retailers are working hard to create that level of transparency all the way to the inputs into the farm gate. And so by this point, the belief of the group is we will have achieved that. And of course, there's significant changes in the world. Global infrastructure changes that will change the competitive set for all of you. By 2100, 5 out of the top 10 most populated countries on the planet are in Africa. Asia also continues to grow beyond China. Significant new markets. We also see Chinese investment in South America and in Eastern Europe and in Africa with their BELT program to try to end around American agriculture. They are working on a chessboard that we're not even really playing on. And so we think there'll be additional competitive forces in the world that will continue to emerge, that will just provide challenges, but also opportunities for all of you. When you move forward to 2040, another 10-year jump, fewer than 75,000 farmers in the U.S. producing 75% of our agricultural output. So 75% of the value of our output done by 75,000 farmers out of 2 million farmers today. And if you really want to get specific, when we modeled this out, it's really 60,400 and some. Now, for those of you that think this is absolutely crazy, as we sit here, it's 105,000.